Hi guys, I'm here to give probably what is the final lecture of the semester. I'm going to talk about two pieces together because they are in conversation with each other. We're going to talk about John Lewis's Together You Can Redeem the Soul of Our Nation. And then we're going to talk about Vanessa Smith's Dream Where Every Black Person is Standing by the Ocean. And Vanessa Smith uses the pronouns of they and them. So I want to talk about John Lewis's piece first. And if you haven't had a chance to read it, you should read it before we do this. But I would actually listen to the audio recording of this because it's very powerful and it's read in a very powerful way. Um, so in case you don't know, a little context about John Lewis. John Lewis is was a senator from Georgia. Let me make sure I get this correct because I do not want to get this wrong. Um, yes, Georgia. And he was an activist. In fact, he was an activist alongside of Dr. King, which makes this piece very important. So we're not ending the class with Dr. King telling us what to do. We did that last week. But what we are doing is we're ending the class. And by ending, I mean we're done reading things because now you've got to concentrate on your research. But we are ending the class um, with the generation that Dr. King inspired. And that generation telling your generation or asking your generation to continue the fight, right? So he was an activist. And if you've not seen Good Trouble, the documentary, you probably should do it. If that does not inspire greatness in you, then you're dead inside. Okay, there's a couple of things that he's doing here. I'm not going to go through it and point out like the use of ethos, pathos, logos, of which it is all through here, how he's using audience, how he's doing this. I am probably going to talk about it as an aside, but not really point them out because I think by this time in the semester, you can probably point these out for yourselves. I think right here, I want to talk about is the theme and how this poem and this this essay, the last thing that John Lewis wrote before he died, right, has a theme here of love and peace. Um, we have gone through this entire semester in turbulence, it feels like. So if you are listening to this in spring 2021, then we've gone through the frost, we've gone through the catching up phase. You've gone through Hurricane Harvey, you have gone through the supposed shooting on campus, you have gone through many, many things. And one thing that I did not want to end this particular semester, especially since we talked about the civil rights movement and we've seen and heard and have experienced through the word a lot of things. I wanted to end with peace. And that's what John Lewis is doing here. He is ending with peace. He is ending with hope, which is what Dr. King in his I See the Promised Land speech actually ended with. He ended with hope. And he gives us a mission, much like Dr. King did last week. And he said, we need to, and I highlighted it here, if we are to survive as one unified nation, we must discover what so readily takes root in our hearts that could rob Mother Emanuel Church in South Carolina of her brightest and best, shoot unwitting concert goers in Las Vegas, and choke to death the hopes and dreams of a gifted violinist like Elijah McClain. So this is an example, of course, of illusion, and he is making illusions of the church shooting in South Carolina, the shooting in Vegas, and the death of Elijah McClain. And so he's pointing out significant things here. He's also talked about Breonna Taylor, and he's talked about other folks who have died at the hands of the other side of a bullet and through police brutality. And so he talks about all this, saying essentially, we've got some big things here. And one thing is just like, we need to understand that in order for us to survive as a nation, we can only do this together. We need to understand what is at the heart of this. Um, he also says a couple of things. And one, of course, is vote, right? And of course, he would say this. He was with Dr. King, marching with Dr. King, and the Voting Rights Acts of the 60s. They worked very, very hard to get that, so allow people to vote, doing away with things like poll tax and things like literacy exams, which only impacted communities of people of color, specifically African Americans in this country. So he said voting is an important thing to do. This is where you can express, this is where you can be quite active. But he also says to study. And how can we continue the work of activism? He says to study, because there were some lessons from long ago that they have learned. And he says it here in the middle of it. You must also study and learn the lessons of history, because humanity has been involved in this soul-wrenching existential struggle for a very long time. And we'll get to that when we're talking about Vanessa Smith and their particular poem, because he hits on this particular theme. He also said, you need to build unions with others. You need to cross the aisle, to use a term that's used in the legislature. But something also that Dr. King said in his last speech before his death, that we have to come all together. And when we are all together, we can strike a mighty blow. He also says, get into some good trouble, right? And good trouble doesn't mean that you don't pay your traffic ticket, ladies and gents. What that means essentially is that you stand up for what you believe in. This is something that Dr. King talked about in Letter from Birmingham Jail, when he talked about just and unjust laws, and that we have a moral obligation to not follow unjust laws, but we also have to be prepared for the consequences that come for not following those laws. And the consequences for not following those laws is what John Lewis calls good trouble. He also talks about nonviolence, and the nonviolent movement needs to continue. So he gives us lots of just action plans here. And if we could draw parallels here to any speech that Dr. King did, of course, would be I See the Promised Land, but also I hear a lot of Letter from Birmingham Jail in this particular piece. And so this makes this piece almost cleansing to end with, because as the future generation, right, or the current generation, the folks, you guys are going to take over this bad boy before you know it. And so John Lewis understands this, and he preaches peace and love, and only through peace and love can things get better. A lot of you have talked about in your journals, in your letters to me, how surprising things were, how they are, how you don't understand how certain people can be treated a certain way because of the color of their skin, because of who they are, who they choose to love, who they choose to be. And so to you, I say, read this letter. Read John Lewis's letter. Read it many times. Read it during the times when you feel the most down. Read it during the times when your heart can't take it anymore. And learn from one of the best who's done it. And I'm done preaching. Okay, so let's get to Vanessa Smith. Their particular poem is amazing. It's one of my favorite poems. I read it as part of his collection, Don't Call Us Dead. And you've never read that collection, you probably should read it. This is a very powerful collection. And it's the last poem in his collection. And he talks a little bit about hope, but in a different way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read this poem to you. And I have never read a poem to you guys this semester, so this will be a treat. I will read this to you and we'll talk about it a little bit. So this poem is called Dream Where Every Black Person is Standing by the Ocean by Vanessa Smith. And we say to her, what have you done with your kin you swallowed? And she says, that was ages ago, you've drunk them by now, and we don't understand. And then one woman, skin dark as all of us, walks to the water's lip, shouts Emmett, spits, and surely a boy begins crawling his way to shore. Very short poem. And the imagery here is very, very distinct. So we have some work here to talk, to kind of undo this. It's a lot of heavy lifting in a short amount, in a short space. So let's talk about how this starts, right? This doesn't start like a full sentence. It doesn't start with once upon a time. It doesn't start like a full sentence, right? It starts with the word and actually starts with the symbol of and. And this is actually a modern thing that modern poets do. They don't usually write the word and, they usually do the ampersand. So in our interpretation of this, we really should understand that this is a modern way of doing this. And so we have here a persona talking to another persona. We as of a collective we, so there's more than one person that's talking to her being the ocean. And we understand that's the ocean based on the title, right? So the title actually is part of the poem. So usually sometimes we interpret poems and we're looking at poetry, sometimes we forget about the title. We just say, oh, that's the title of the thing. And then we start at the first word of the poem. When indeed we really should be looking at the title of the poem as part of the poem. So we know that every Black person versus the ocean. That's what we got. We have two personas, two people talking, or two personas talking in this particular very short poem. And so what we have also is that the dialogue is in italics and it's very short. And so the question here is, what have you done with our kin you have swallowed? And so this harks back to the Atlantic slave trade, where the slaves who could get out of their chains jumped into the ocean because they would rather have jumped into the ocean and committed suicide rather than surviving whatever was coming, starving to get to whatever was coming. Also, if there were slaves who died as part of the Atlantic slave trade, they were chucked into the ocean as well. So there's a big saying in the African American community or in the Black community overall across the diaspora, especially on this side of the continent, that we are from the ancestors that survived. And we're not talking about just the survival of slavery, but the survival of the trip from the west coast of Africa to the New World. So this is what it's alluding to, the ocean swallowing kin, so the ancestors that didn't make it. We also see this, this idea of the kinfolk in Black Panther and Afrofuturism as well. So we have the collective we talking to the ocean. The ocean responds, that was ages ago, you've drunk them by now. And so ages ago, definitely centuries ago, and by then, like, we've already ingested who they were into us. And so it's not so much that ocean water was just drunk by the collective we, but that we have already taken our ancestors into us. And it's a collective ancestry, right? It's not just the ancestry of Ghana or Nigeria or whatever countries they came from. It's a collective drinking of this story of the Atlantic slave trade and the aftermath of that, from slavery to Jim Crow to segregation to Black Lives Matter. We have already drunk that that legacy, that ancestral legacy collectively already. And so the idea that we don't understand kind of gives pause to the reader about what's going on here. John Lewis kind of touches this on this, right? Like we all have to unify and do this together. And while John Lewis was talking about all of us collectively unifying, Vanessa Smith talks about everyone in the African diaspora unifying, right? And so then we have this woman, skin dark as all of us. And so this right here, this image of a dark-skinned woman going to the water slip and spitting, is really an idea of someone who is as close to the African descent as possible. She shouts Emmett, and Emmett here is an allusion to Emmett Till, someone that John Lewis also talked about in his last letter to the world. And he talked about how Emmett Smith, or sorry, not Emmett Smith, Emmett Till, wrong Emmett. Emmett Till was his precipice, just like it was his Breonna Taylor, it was his everybody, right? His Tamir Rice. He was 14 when he was dragged and drowned and the whole nine. So Emmett being kind of the one that is remembered. There were countless others that were lynched, but Emmett was the one that hurt, because Emmett was the one that the Emmett Till incident kickstarted the civil rights movement, and made everyone kind of wake up a little bit, not wake up, but moved people to action. And so Emmett, as they say, Emmett spits, and surely a boy begins crawling his way to shore. So it comes home, right? The idea that our ancestors come home to us, that no matter where we go, no matter what we do, that they are a part of us as much as we are a part of them. And it only takes a word, and that they always come home, and we will always be home. So that idea of John Lewis saying essentially, get into good trouble, vote peace and love. This is a different type of peace, knowing that no one's ever really gone, and that we continue on, just like John Lewis urges us to continue on. So it's a different type of peace and a different type of love, but it's still love and peace at the same time. I am done lecturing. This is the last lecture that we're doing. I'm so proud of you. I'm proud of the work that you are doing. I cannot wait to read your research. I cannot wait to give you notes. I can't wait to see you present. I can't wait to see who's going to make it to Honors Day. You guys have been amazing this semester. Thank you for hanging in there. Thank you for doing the good work. Get in good trouble. And by good trouble, I mean turn in your stuff on time, because your girl has no time to play because I have 5 other classes to grade. Love you. Bye.